At 7:41 on a Thursday morning, a boy was dead in a quarry pond in Vandalia County, Ohio. At 7:52, that same boy was sitting at a kitchen table 9 miles away, eating cereal with too much sugar in it, complaining that the milk was too cold. Both of those sentences are true. It isn't a riddle, and it isn't a ghost story. I'm Nathan, and the reason I picked this one out of the stack is that it turns on something almost nobody thinks about until it lands on them. In most of this country, deciding who a dead person is doesn't require a scientist. It requires a signature. One person looks at a face, says a name out loud, and a machine made of paperwork starts rolling in that direction, and that machine does not like to be told it is wrong. A father in this story spent 11 days shoving against that machine with nothing but a work habit. He photographed everything, because in his trade, a picture with a timestamp is the difference between getting paid and getting sued. What that habit eventually showed him about the man who signed his son's name onto another child's body is worse than anything he was accused of doing. Watch how the lie gets assembled, because it gets assembled out of completely ordinary parts. And watch the boy at the table. He knows more than every adult in the county, and for 4 days not one of them thinks to ask him. Chase Ravenel had a rule about the crusts, and the rule was that the crusts came off in one piece, or not at all. He worked the knife along the edge of the bread at 6:50 in the morning, one hip against the counter, the kitchen light still doing all the work because the sun hadn't cleared the ridge behind the house yet. Turkey, one slice of provolone, mustard on the top piece only so the bottom didn't go soft by lunch. Apple sliced into 8, not 6. A note on the back of a business card from Ravenel Restoration, because he never had regular paper in the house, only cards, only invoices, only the flat cardboard clipboards he carried into flooded basements. The note said, "Wednesdays are the worst day. It's already Thursday. You got this." He tucked it under the apple slices where Rylan would find it after he'd already started eating and be surprised by it. That was the whole point of the note. Chase had learned in 18 months of split custody that the things that landed with an 8-year-old were the things that arrived when the kid wasn't braced for them. Behind him, at the table, his son was eating cereal in the hood of a gray sweatshirt with the drawstrings pulled tight so that only a circle of face showed, which was a thing Rylan had started doing that winter and which Chase had decided not to make into a fight. "Milk's cold," the boy said. "Milk's cold," Chase agreed. "That's the general idea of milk." The boy didn't laugh, and Chase clocked that, and filed it, and kept slicing. He was 41 years old, and he ran a company of 6 people out of a metal building on Route 9 in Harrow Springs. And what the company did was show up at the worst hour of somebody's worst week. Burst supply lines, basements taking 11 inches of stormwater, kitchen fires that left a house standing but made everything in it smell like a struck match for the rest of its life. Chase Ravenel's father, Dorsey, had started it in 1988 with 2 trash pumps and a Ford, and Chase had taken it over 4 years before Dorsey's heart quit on him in a church parking lot. And in those 4 years, he had changed exactly one thing, but that one thing had doubled the business. Dorsey used to fight insurance companies with his mouth. Chase fought them with a camera. Every job, from the second the truck door opened, photographs. Wide, medium, tight. Moisture readings written on a whiteboard and held up in frame so the number and the room were in the same picture. Serial numbers on every appliance. Contents inventoried into a tablet, item by item, with the timestamp burned into the corner of every file and every file backed up to a server in the office, and a second one in Columbus before the crew broke for lunch. Adjusters had learned that if they wanted to argue with Ravenel Restoration, they were going to be arguing with 1,400 photographs, and adjusters do not have time for that. So they paid, and the phone kept ringing. His whole life, people had told Chase Ravenel he was obsessive. Nobody had told him yet that it was going to be the reason he kept his kid. "You want the milk warmed up?" he said. "I can do that. It's disgusting, but I can do it." "No." Big talk from a man in a hood. The boy pushed the spoon around the bowl. He hadn't taken the hood off. Outside the window, the fog was sitting in the low part of the field, the way it did in August, in a long white finger that pointed at the tree line, and a school bus was working its way up the county road 3 farms over, and everything was as ordinary as it is possible for a morning to be. Chase's phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Karis Mattingly, his estimator, who was always up before him and always cheerful about it in a way he found borderline hostile. 2 calls overnight, church basement in Ordway, and the Whitcomb Funeral Home wants their annual backflow inspection moved up. Also, you're out of coffee at the shop and I'm not buying it again. He typed back. I'll buy the coffee. Push Whitcomb to next month, he can wait. He would think about that text a great deal later. He would think about how casually he had shoved it aside. The house had been his grandmother's, and he had traded the retirement account, the boat, and the good truck to keep it, because it had an old oak in the yard and an upstairs bedroom with an east window, and Rylan liked to be woken by light instead of by a person. 18 months since Devaney moved out, 14 months since the decree, 50-50 custody, alternating weeks with a Wednesday night swap, and Devaney had a habit of dropping the boy off early or late without warning, and Chase had a habit of not fighting about it, because Sunday Halstead, his lawyer, had told him in a voice like a closing door, the man who keeps score in front of a judge is the man who loses. Just be the house where the kid is happy. That's the whole strategy. There is no other strategy. So when Chase had come in at 1 a.m. from a flooded church basement in Ordway, soaked to the knee, and had gone upstairs out of habit to look in on a bedroom that was supposed to be empty until Friday, and had found a lump under the quilt and a small pair of sneakers set side by side on the floor, he had not called Devaney to argue about it. He had stood in the doorway for a second in his wet socks, and been glad, and gone to bed. He had not turned on the light. That was the part that would sit on his chest for the rest of his life. At 7 o'clock, he zipped the lunch bag and set it by the door on top of the backpack. At 7:04, he poured coffee. At 7:11, a Vandalia County Sheriff's cruiser came up the gravel with its lights off, moving slow, the way people drive when they are not in a hurry to arrive. Chase watched it through the window over the sink and felt the first cold thing move through his stomach, because a cruiser at 7 a.m. is never about anything good, and because the deputy who got out of it stood behind his own open door for 4 full seconds before he closed it, and a man does not do that unless he is deciding how to say something. The deputy came up onto the porch. He was young, maybe 29, jaw shaved raw, hat in his hand already, which is the worst sign there is. Chase opened the door before he knocked. Mr. Ravenel? Yeah. Sir, I'm Deputy Corbett Mabry. He stopped. He started again. Sir, your son was found dead this morning, out at the old Pell Quarry Pond off Route 9. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Behind Chase, in the kitchen, a spoon clicked against the side of a bowl. Chase heard his own voice come out flat and reasonable, like a man correcting a delivery address. No, he said. He's at the table. He's eating cereal. Deputy Mabry went very still. It was not the stillness of a man who thinks he's talking to someone in shock. Chase had seen that kind of stillness 100 times in doorways, the gentle bracing that comes before somebody says, "Sir, I need you to sit down." This was different. This was the stillness of a man whose hand had just gotten cold. "Sir," Mabry said, "who is at the table?" "My son, Rylan. He's right there." Chase stepped back to let him see, and Mabry came in the door and around the corner into the kitchen, and looked at the boy in the gray hood with the spoon in his hand. And Deputy Corbett Mabry put his palm flat on the top of his holster, and moved 1 foot back, and said, in a voice that had gone completely level, "Sir, step back from him, right now. That isn't your son," Mabry said. The sentence landed in the kitchen and just sat there. Chase looked at the deputy's hand on the holster, and then at the boy at the table, who had stopped chewing and was watching the two of them with the blank, careful face children put on when they have already learned that adults get loud. "Say that again," Chase said. "Sir, I need you to move away from the child and put your hands where I can see them." "Deputy." Chase raised both hands to shoulder height, slowly, palms out, and did not move his feet. "I'm not going to fight with you. I'm going to talk very calmly, and you're going to listen, because in about 4 minutes you're going to be the only person in this county who knows what's actually happening, and I need you to still be thinking." "Sir." "Rylan," Chase said, without turning around. "Buddy, put the hood down." The boy hesitated. Then he pushed the hood back with both hands, the way kids do, and there was his face, the cowlick that would not lie down, the front tooth that had come in crooked and was going to cost $4,000 in 6 years, the small crescent scar above the left eyebrow from the coffee table when he was 3. Mabry's face changed by about 2 millimeters, which on a young deputy is the same as a scream. "You saw that scar this morning," Chase said. "Didn't you?" Mabry didn't answer. He didn't have to. Chase had spent 20 years reading people across kitchen tables while they tried to decide whether to tell him the truth about the water heater, and he could see the man's whole morning going through him at once. "Okay," Chase said, "then here's the next thing, and I want you to watch me do it, and I want you to record it. Take out your phone." "Sir, I have a body camera." "Then point it at his back." Chase crouched down beside the chair. "Rye, I'm going to lift your shirt up in the back so this officer can see. Is that all right?" "Why?" the boy said. "Because he needs to know you're you." Rylan considered this with tremendous seriousness. "Okay," he said, and leaned forward over his cereal. Chase lifted the sweatshirt and the t-shirt under it, and the deputy took one step closer and then stopped moving entirely. Across the boy's back, from the left shoulder blade down to the small of his spine, ran a spill of old burn scarring, tight, shiny, pale, mapped with the fine grid lines of skin grafts, the color of candle wax where the sun never reached it. It was the kind of scar you cannot fake and cannot acquire in a morning. It was 6 years old. It had cost Rylan Ravenel 11 surgeries, a year of pressure garments, and 2 summers of not being allowed to swim. "When he was 2, Chase said quietly, "a rental we were in had a propane wall heater that the manufacturer knew was defective. There's a settlement. There's 400 pages of medical records at Vandalia Regional and at the burn unit in Cincinnati, all of them with photographs. That is my son. Now tell me who is out at that quarry." Mabry keyed his shoulder mic and then, halfway through, took his hand off it. "Sir," he said, "when I say your son was found this morning, I mean I was standing at that pond at 6:05, and I mean the mother was already there." Chase's hands went cold to the second knuckle. "Devaney was at the pond. Miss Presnell was at the pond. Yes, sir. She called it in. She said she'd gone out looking because he'd run off from her house in the night, and she—" Mabry stopped, and Chase watched him decide to keep going. "She made the identification at the scene, and then she told me something about you." "What did she tell you?" "She said you'd been talking, the last couple months, about a boy from the church youth program. She said you'd been strange about him. She said if we came out here and there was a child in your house, it wouldn't be Rylan." Mabry's throat worked. "She said it about 20 minutes before dispatch sent me here. So when I walked in that door, sir, I already had that in my head. I want that on the record, because I'm not real proud of it." Chase stood up very slowly. "There is a specific temperature a mind reaches, and it is not hot. It is the opposite. Everything gets quiet and very, very organized." She hadn't just identified a body, she had preloaded the story. She had built a version of the world where a dead boy at the quarry was Rylan, and a living boy in Chase's kitchen was proof that Chase was a monster. And she had put that version into the head of the first deputy on the scene before anybody knocked on his door. Which meant she had known there might be a living boy here. Which meant she had known there was a second child in the equation before anybody found the first one. "Deputy Mabry," Chase said, "I need you to do exactly 3 things, and then you can arrest me if you want, and I won't say a word about it. I'm listening. 1. Do not let anybody move that body out of the county. 2. Photograph that child's back yourself. Right now, on your camera, with the date. 3. He picked up the lunch bag off the floor by the door and held it out. He hasn't eaten. Whatever happens to me in the next hour, somebody needs to give him this." They arrested him anyway. Of course they did. It took 90 minutes, and to Corbett Mabry's credit, it was as gentle as an arrest can be. No cuffs until they were outside and around the corner of the porch where the boy couldn't see, and Mabry saying, "Lo, this is going to unwind, sir. Just don't say anything to anybody but a lawyer." Sheriff Ingram Standifer arrived at 8:40, 60 years old, 31 of them behind that star, and he stood in Chase's kitchen with his thumbs in his belt and looked at the boy and looked at Chase and said the sentence Chase would carry around for the next 11 days. "Chase," I've known your daddy since I was 19, but I've got a mother who identified her child, and I've got a coroner's man who agrees with her, and I've got you standing here with a kid you say is that same child. One of those things has got to be wrong, and I'd be a fool to guess which. Sheriff, look at his back. I'm going to look at everything, Standifer said, and he meant it, and he was going to be slow about it, and slow was exactly what Devaney Presnell had bought. The part that took the ground out from under Chase Ravenel happened at 11 that morning, in a county building, while he sat in an interview room with his hands flat on a table. A caseworker from Children's Services took emergency custody of the boy, pending identification. Standard, unavoidable, correct. And because Ohio law prefers kinship placement over a stranger's foster home, and because the child's father was in a locked room and the child's mother was, on paper, a grieving woman who had just lost a son, they gave him to Devaney's mother. They put Rylan Ravenel, alive, in the house of Verona Presnell, 9 miles up the Sable Road, where his mother could reach him whenever she wanted. Chase heard it through the door, from a hallway conversation not meant for him, and for the first time in 18 months, he put his forehead down on a table and made a sound. Sunday Halstead got him out at 4 in the afternoon on his own recognizance, because there was no body that anyone could prove belonged to anyone, and no charge that would survive a weekend, and because she stood in front of a magistrate and said the phrase, "a living child with medical records in 2 counties 11 times in 9 minutes. She was 52, built like a fence post, and she had been divorcing people in Vandalia County for a quarter of a century. "Don't go near your mother-in-law's house," she said in the parking lot. "Don't go near Devaney. Don't go near that pond. Anything you touch turns into evidence against you, so touch nothing." Then what do? You go home, and you tell me the story of your marriage from the beginning, and this time, you tell me the parts you've been too embarrassed to say out loud. They sat at his kitchen table until 11 at night, with the cereal bowl still in the sink where it had been that morning, because he could not make himself wash it. Chase had met Devaney Presnell at a continuing education seminar in Dayton. Of all the unromantic places on earth, she was there for her notary and title agent renewal. He was there for a mold remediation certification, and they had both skipped the afternoon session and gotten pie. She was quick and funny, and she noticed things. That was the thing about her that nobody outside the marriage ever understood. Devaney was not stupid, and she was not lazy. She was one of the most observant people he had ever met. She could walk into a house and tell you what the people in it were ashamed of. She ran her own shop out of the second bedroom, mobile notary, title closings, estate paperwork. In a county where the nearest real title office was 40 minutes away, she was the woman who came to your kitchen at 8 at night with a stamp and a journal and got the deed signed. She sat with the newly widowed. She was, professionally, the person who watched other people's worst weeks turn into documents. The fire happened in the 3rd year, a rental on Fenner Street, a wall-mounted propane heater with a recalled regulator that had never actually been recalled in Ohio, and Rylan 2 years old and asleep 11 feet from it. Chase got him out. That is the whole sentence, and Chase never told it longer than that, and the burns on his own right forearm were, by comparison, nothing. The lawsuit took 4 years. The manufacturer settled in the 5th, and because Rylan was a minor, the money did not arrive as money. It arrived as a structured settlement annuity, $2.4 million in total value, paid out in scheduled installments, medical costs first, then a payment at 18, then 21, then 25, then a monthly income for life. Sensible, protected, untouchable. Except for one paragraph. Every structure has a death clause because the insurer needs to know where the money goes if the payee dies before it runs out. Rylan said that if the beneficiary died before his 18th birthday, the remaining scheduled payments would be commuted, collapsed into a single lump sum, and paid to the named contingent payee. $1,940,000 in one check to a name on a form. When you signed it, Sunday said, who was the contingent payee? Both of us, joint. I remember the conversation. I remember the room. I remember the guy's tie. And after the divorce? Nothing changed. Nothing was supposed to change. The decree didn't touch the structure. It's the kid's money. Sunday looked at him over the top of her glasses. Chase, when did you last physically look at that document? He went out to the shop at midnight, alone, and opened his father's fire safe, the one Dorsey had bolted to the concrete in 1994, and never once trusted a bank instead of. Inside were the deed, the truck titles, Dorsey's discharge papers, and a manila envelope with the annuity documents Chase had never had a reason to open in 6 years. He opened it at a workbench under a droplight with the crickets going outside. The beneficiary designation form was dated 14 months ago, 3 weeks after the divorce decree. Contingent payee, Devaney M. Presnell, Seoul. And at the bottom of page 2, in the block marked signature of custodial parent/guardian, was his own name. Chase Ravenel looked at his own signature for a long time. It was good. It was genuinely good. The C had his hook. The R had the loop that his hand made when he was in a hurry, which was always. She had watched him sign things across kitchen tables for 11 years. She had watched him sign the mortgage, the truck loan, the school forms, the hospital consents, the 400-page settlement itself. She had been a professional witness to signatures for a decade and a half. Of course it was good. But he had never in his life signed a document with a pen he did not choose, and this one was signed in blue. Chase Ravenel used black. Only black. Every job, every estimate, every contract. For 20 years, because blue photocopies badly, and adjusters photocopy everything. It was the single most boring fact about him. His crew made fun of him for it. There was a cup of 30 black pens on his desk at the shop, and not one blue one in the building. He took 41 photographs of that form on the workbench with a ruler beside it before he touched it again. Then he sat down on an overturned bucket in his own shop at midnight and let himself understand the shape of it. She had put herself on the money 14 months ago. That was not a crime of the moment. That was groundwork. 14 months of a woman waking up next to a fact worth $1.94 million that only existed if her son died. And then, on a Wednesday night in August, her son had not been where he was supposed to be, and a boy had been found in a pond, and she had been standing at the water's edge with a story about Chase already in her mouth. He thought about the text from Karis, the one he had swiped away at 7 in the morning. The Whitcomb Funeral Home wants their annual backflow inspection moved up. Anson Whitcomb, 3rd generation. Whitcomb and Sons, the only funeral home in 3 townships, and, because Vandalia County was too small to pay for a full-time medical examiner and too proud to admit it, the county's contracted deputy coroner. The man who drove out when somebody died at home. The man who wrote the removal reports. The man whose name went on the identification line that the elected coroner, a 70-year-old family physician named Dr. Stedman who still made house calls, signed off on because Anson Whitcomb had never once given him a reason not to. Chase sat on the bucket and thought about Devaney's car 2 summers ago, and the tin of mints in the console that he had never seen her buy. Green tin, cheap peppermint, the kind that sits in a bowl by the guest book at a funeral home. He had noticed it. He had thought about it for about 4 seconds, and then he had let it go, the way you let go of 100 small wrong things a year, because the alternative is to be the kind of man who counts mints. The machine moved faster than any part of the legal system Chase had ever dealt with. The body came out of the Pell Quarry Pond at 6:50 on Thursday morning and was at Whitcomb and Sons by 8:15, transported by Anson Whitcomb's own removal van, driven by Anson Whitcomb's brother-in-law, a thin, jittery man named Kelso Doggett, who had done 4 years for possession and who worked removals because Anson was the only man in the county who would hire him. By 10, Anson had filed the identification report. Positive visual identification by the biological mother at the scene, corroborated by clothing and personal effects. A gray hooded sweatshirt, 1 sneaker recovered from the bank, and a rescue inhaler with a pharmacy label reading Ravenel, Rylan. By 2 in the afternoon, Dr. Stedman had signed a death certificate listing the cause as accidental drowning, manner accidental, pending routine toxicology that nobody expected to look at. By 4:30 on Friday, 32 hours after a boy came out of the water, Devaney Presnell had filed an authorization for cremation. Sunday Halstead read it off her phone in the gravel of Chase's driveway on Saturday morning and said a word Chase had never heard a lawyer say out loud. "That's not grief," she said. Nobody grieving burns a child in 32 hours. That's a woman getting rid of an object. Can you stop it? I can file. Monday, earliest. Judge Ammons is at his cabin, and the on-call magistrate is a man who thinks I'm rude. And the cremation is scheduled for when? Sunday scrolled. Stopped. Monday, 10 a.m. Chase stood in his driveway and did the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was very simple. If that body burned, then there was no back to look at, no forearm to x-ray, no dental comparison, no tissue. There would be a death certificate saying Rylan Ravenel died on a Thursday in August, and a living boy in Verona Presnell's house who legally did not exist, and a father who had been publicly accused of taking a child. The paperwork would have won, and paperwork is the only thing in America that never gets tired. He needed to stop a cremation by Monday morning without a judge, without the sheriff, and without going within a mile of anyone involved. He went inside and made a pot of coffee and sat down with the annuity documents and read the boring parts, the parts nobody reads, the parts he read for a living. And on page 31, in the section titled Commutation upon Death of Payee, he found it. Payment of the commuted benefit shall be made upon receipt of certified proof of death satisfactory to the company, and the company reserves the right to conduct such investigation as it deems necessary, including but not limited to independent verification of identity prior to disbursement. Chase Ravenel had spent 20 years in a business that lived and died on one fact. An insurance company will move heaven, earth, and a county sheriff to avoid writing a check it isn't sure about. He had watched carriers fly investigators in from 3 states over a $40,000 roof. This was $1.94 million. He found the carrier's fraud line on the back page of the annuity booklet and called it at 8:40 on a Saturday morning and got a recording and left a message that he rewrote 4 times on a legal pad before he spoke it, because he knew exactly what an intake analyst listens for. My name is Chase Ravenel. I'm the custodial father of the payee on structure number 4-417HP, a minor named Rylan Ravenel. A claim for the death commutation benefit under that structure is going to be presented to you within the next few days by the named contingent payee. I'm calling to tell you that the payee is not dead. He is alive. He is in kinship placement with Vandalia County Children's Services, and there is a physical body currently at a funeral home in Harrow Springs, Ohio, that has been misidentified as him and is scheduled to be cremated Monday at 10 a.m. I have reason to believe the beneficiary designation on file with you, dated 14 months ago, carries a forged signature, mine. I'm not asking you for money. I'm asking you to protect your own file. He hung up and did not expect anything to happen, because it was Saturday. His phone rang at 9:51. Bridger Kirkendall was a special investigations analyst out of the carrier's Hartford office, and he had a voice like a man who had been awake for a while and enjoyed it. Mr. Ravenel, I've got your structure open. I've also got a first notice of loss that came in yesterday afternoon at 4:11. So somebody's fast. Then you understand my problem. I understand my problem, Kirkendall said, which is that we do not commute $2 million on a visual ID by an interested party 36 hours after a death when the custodial parent is on the phone telling me the kid's eating breakfast. That's not a claim. That's an invitation to a deposition, a pause, and paper moving. Give me the funeral home. Whitcomb & Sons, Harrow Springs. The director is also the county's contract deputy coroner. He made the identification, and he has the body. The silence on the other end lasted 4 seconds. He's the coroner, and the funeral home, Kirkendall said, and the disposition. Yes. Mr. Ravenel, in 19 years, I have seen that exact arrangement produce exactly one kind of file. Chase heard a chair move. I'm sending a preservation demand this morning to the funeral home, the county coroner, the sheriff, and the probate court, and I'm copying the Ohio Board of Embalmers and Funeral Directors, because a licensed director who destroys remains after written notice of a contested identification loses his license before he loses the lawsuit. Nobody is burning anything Monday. Chase put his hand flat on the kitchen table and held on to it. Mr. Kirkendall. Yeah, thank you. Don't thank me. I've got a fiduciary duty and you've got a kid, and this is one of maybe 4 times a year those point the same direction. Papers again. Now, you said forged. Do Do you have a reason or a feeling? I have a pen color, Chase said. Bridger Kirkendall laughed once, sharp, like a man who had just been handed something. Mr. Ravenel, he said, you have no idea how many of these come apart on a pen. The preservation demand reached Whitcomb and Sons at 11:52 on Saturday morning, 68 minutes before Kelso Doggett was scheduled to move a body into a retort. Anson Whitcomb read it standing up at his front desk, and then he went into his office and shut the door and did not come out for 40 minutes. On Sunday, the county had to admit there was a second question, and once a county admits there is a second question, everything it has already decided starts to look expensive. Sheriff Standifer drove out himself. He stood on the porch with the bad board and did not come inside. They pulled the boys back at the placement, he said. The scar's there. Vandalia Regional pulled the surgical records, and the burn unit in Cincinnati sent photographs. That child at Verona's is Rylan Ravenel, and there's no argument left about it. Chase's knees did something he did not let show. Then who's in the funeral home? That's the whole trouble, isn't it? Standifer turned his hat around by the brim. Chase, Thursday morning I looked at you like a thing I'd scrape off a shoe, because a woman cried at a pond, and a man with a coroner's badge said her name for her. He put the hat on. The charges are gone. Emergency custody gets undone Tuesday. Soon as the caseworker can get in front of the magistrate. That's the fastest I can push it, and it's still 2 days too slow, and I know it. Sheriff, who is in the funeral home? BCI's coming Wednesday to take a look. State Labs got a queue. Wednesday. Chase Ravenel had 5 days. He did what he was actually good at, which was not detective work. It was inventory. He drove to the shop on Sunday afternoon, unlocked the office, and sat down in front of the machine that held every photograph Ravenel Restoration had taken in 11 years. 406,000 of them, tagged by job number, address, date, and room, because insurers demand it, and because Dorsey Ravenel's son had never in his life thrown away a file. Because here was the thing Chase understood that nobody else in the county did. A body had appeared in Vandalia County that looked enough like his son to fool a deputy at a pond. 8 years old, same build, same coloring. That child was from somewhere. Children do not arrive in a county like Weather. Somebody had raised him, fed him, and lived in a house with him, and Ravenel Restoration went into houses. All of them. The trailers, the farmhouses, the rentals nobody else would quote. 6 people, 2 trucks, every water loss and smoke loss in 3 townships for 11 years. If that boy had ever been inside a building his crew had photographed, he was on that hard drive. Chase started with a filter. Every job within 20 miles, going back 3 years, residential, occupied. 1,100 jobs. He started looking at Sunday, 4 p.m. Karis Mattingly showed up at 7 with sandwiches, and no discussion about it. Sat down at the second monitor and started at the other end of the list. She was 33, had been an EMT for 6 years before her back gave out, and had once told an adjuster on speakerphone that she'd rather eat drywall than take his number. What am I looking for? She said. A kid, 8, 10, dark blonde, in the background of a frame where he shouldn't be. Chase. She stopped with a sandwich halfway up. You know that's a lot of pictures. It's 400,000 pictures, and it's the only place in the world where I'm the one who already has the answer and doesn't know it. They found him at 1:40 on Monday morning. Job number 9941, June the 11th, 6 weeks earlier. A single wide on Sable Road, 11 miles out. A supply line under a bathroom sink that had let go and run for 2 days before anybody noticed. Small job, $1,200. Chase hadn't been on it. His tech had. A kid named Presley who had done what he was trained to do, which was photograph every square foot of the structure whether it was wet or not. Frame 41. A hallway shot, aimed at a baseboard. And in the doorway at the end of the hall, half out of the frame, blurred by a slow shutter in a dark trailer, a boy in a red t-shirt was standing with a dog's collar in his hand, looking at the camera. Karis said, very quietly, "Oh no." Chase enlarged it until it broke into squares, and then backed off 2 steps, and looked at a face that was not his son's face. The nose was different, the ears were different, the chin came to more of a point, and was, from across a pond at 6 in the morning in bad light, in the same clothes, close enough to be anybody's son. "Get the job file," he said. His voice came out wrong. Karis already had it up. "Billed to the property owner, Elowin Vantries, 71, paid by check," and she wrote the check number on the memo line of the invoice, which is a thing nobody has done since 1988. She scrolled. "There's a note from Presley. He put it in the contents log. Read it. Homeowner asked us not to move the boxes in the back bedroom. Grandson lives there, sleeps on the couch during work. Very polite kid. Followed us around the whole time. Name is Ridley." Chase sat back in the chair. The furnace clicked on somewhere in the building. Outside the office window, the security light over the yard was doing its slow orange flicker, the one he'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. "Ridley," he said. The name went into the room and did not come back out. It was, Chase would say later, the moment the entire thing stopped being about him. Up until 1:40 on Monday morning, he had been a man fighting to keep his son. After 1:40, he was a man who knew that somewhere in Vandalia County there was a house where a boy's shoes were still by the door, and an old woman who did not know. He printed frame 41 at full size. Then he opened the job's timestamp metadata, and the invoice, and the check image, and Presley's contents log, and built the thing he built 4 times a week for a living. A documentation package, cover sheet, index, chain of custody. Every file hashed. He burned it to 2 drives, put one in the fire safe, and drove the other to Sunday Halstead's front porch at 3 in the morning, and left it in her storm door with a note on the back of a business card. The note said, "The dead boy has a name. It is not my son's." The Vantries place sat at the end of Sable Road where the gravel gave out and became 2 ruts and a suggestion. A single wide up on blocks, a burn barrel, a garden with tomatoes staked with electrical conduit, and a culvert under the drive where the creek came through. A corrugated steel pipe about 3 feet across with a grate on the upstream end, half choked with brush. Chase parked at the mailbox and let Karis knock, because a 71-year-old woman alone at the end of a road does not need a strange man at her door. Elowin Vantries was small and straight-backed, and her hands were ruined with arthritis, and she recognized the Ravenel Restoration logo on the truck before she recognized either of them. "You're the water people," she said. "You did good work. You didn't charge me for the second day." "No, ma'am," Karis said. "We didn't." They sat in a front room with a box fan in the window and a wall of photographs in dollar store frames. Chase saw the boy in 9 of them, Ridley at 4 with a fish, Ridley in a plastic pool, Ridley asleep on a dog. "He's with his aunt," Elowin said when Chase asked. "Down in Kentucky, since June." "Ma'am," Karis said gently, "when did you last talk to him?" "Well," Elowin's hands went to the arms of the chair. "She don't have good service down there." "Ma'am." The old woman looked at the fan for a while. "There's no aunt," she said. And then she told them, in the flat voice of somebody who has been rehearsing a sentence alone in a house for 6 weeks and has never once said it out loud. Ridley Vantries had lived with his grandmother since he was 2, after his mother went to Dayton and stopped calling. He wasn't in school. Elowin had filed the homeschool notification the first year and not the second, because the form confused her and nobody ever came. He had a dog named Biscuit. He had never seen a dentist. He was, in every way a county keeps track of a child, invisible. On the 9th of June there had been a storm, 4 inches in 90 minutes, the kind that turns a ditch into a river for an hour and then goes back to being a ditch. Biscuit had gotten out. Ridley went after him in the dark in his boots. The dog had gotten up on the grate at the mouth of the culvert, where the brush had packed in, and the water was going over the top of it. Elowin found her grandson at 10 past midnight. "I did everything," she said. "I did the breathing. I did it a long time." She did not call 911. She called the only person in the county who had ever done her a kindness, Anson Whitcomb, who had buried her husband in 2009 on a payment plan he never once pressed her about, who sent a card every Christmas, who had told her at the graveside, "You call me if you ever need anything at all." Anson came out at 1 in the morning in the removal van with Kelso Doggett, and Anson Whitcomb sat down in that front room with a dead 9-year-old on the floor and told a grieving woman the following things: that the county would want to know why the boy wasn't in school, that there'd be an investigation into neglect. That at her age, with the state involved, this ended with her in a home and Ridley's name in a newspaper. That if she'd let him, he would take care of it quietly. A private disposition, no fuss, no state. And if anyone ever asked, the boy had gone to family in Kentucky. He said it was a kindness, Elowen said. He held my hand when he said it. He took the body. He left her with a bill marked paid in full and a small oak box of ashes that she kept on the shelf under the window, which Chase Ravenel looked at across that room and understood, with a slowness that felt like drowning, was not Ridley. Because Ridley Vantrease had been in the cooler at Whitcomb & Sons for 8 weeks. Anson had not disposed of that child. He had kept him, a boy of the right age and the right size with no dental records, no school file, no doctor, no fingerprints, no living parent who would ask, the one thing on earth that a certain kind of plan requires and can almost never obtain. And on a Wednesday night in August, 2 months later, he had taken him out. Chase went out to the truck and stood with both hands on the hood for a while. Then he came back in and sat down across from Elowen Vantrease and told her the truth, all of it, in order, and did not soften any of it, because he had decided somewhere between the porch and the door that this woman had been handled gently by a professional and it had cost her everything. When he got to the part about the pond, she made a sound and put her hand over her mouth and said, "In the water." He put him back in the water. "Yes, ma'am." He knew how that boy died. Her voice came up out of her like something being torn loose. He knew, and he put him in the water anyway, so it'd match. Chase had not thought of that. That was the detail that came out of the mouth of a 71-year-old woman in a trailer at the end of Sable Road, and it was, 10 weeks later, the sentence a prosecutor would read aloud twice to a jury. They stayed until dark. Karis made her eat something. Chase took 140 photographs, the culvert, the grate, the brush line, the boots by the door, the wall of pictures, the oak box, the paid-in-full invoice on Whitcomb & Sons letterhead with a date on it, and logged every one of them the way he logged a fire loss, because it was the only skill he had, and this woman was going to need it in a courtroom. At the door, she took hold of his sleeve. "Your boy," she said. "The one they said was mine. Rylan. He's alive." "He's alive, ma'am." Elowen Vantrease nodded slowly, several times. "Good," she said. "One of them ought to be." Tuesday at 11:20, a magistrate returned Rylan Ravenel to his father in a hallway that smelled like floor wax, and the boy walked the last 6 feet on his own and put his forehead into Chase's stomach and stood there. That night, in the truck, on the long way home, Chase finally asked him, "Ry, Wednesday night, how'd you get to my house?" "Walked mostly." The boy was looking out the window. "The Kesterlines' dog barked at me by the pond, and I had to go around in the beans." "That's 5 miles, bud." "I know. It took forever." "Why'd you leave Mom's?" Rylan was quiet for 1.5 miles. Then, in the voice of a kid reciting something he had already decided was his own fault, "There were suitcases. Mine and hers. And Mr. Whitcomb came at night and they were talking in the kitchen and I was supposed to be asleep." He picked at the seatbelt. "He said the boy has to be in the car by 4. And Mom said, 'He'll ask questions.' And Mr. Whitcomb said, 'He'll be asleep. That's what it's for.'" Chase kept both hands on the wheel and drove exactly the speed limit. "There was a cup on the counter," Rylan said. "Mom made me chocolate milk. She never makes it at night." "Did you drink it?" "I poured it in the sink, and I put water in the cup so it'd look like I drank some, and then I put my sweatshirt on, and I got my shoes, and I went out the laundry room window because it doesn't have the alarm sticker." "Why my house?" The boy looked at him like he had asked something stupid. "Because you always leave a light on," Rylan said. Chase pulled over at the top of the ridge and told his son that he had done everything exactly right, 3 separate ways, and that the smartest thing anybody in that county had done all week was pour a cup of chocolate milk down a sink. Then he drove home, put the kid to bed, went out to the shop, and got to work. Because he knew all of it now, and knowing is worth nothing. The physical evidence, the cooler, the removal log, the second body, the 8 weeks of it, sat inside a private building owned by the man who held the county's coroner badge, and Chase was a private citizen who had been arrested 9 days earlier and whose lawyer had told him that anything he touched turned into poison. If he broke into that funeral home, every single thing he found would be suppressed. Anson Whitcomb would walk, and Chase would go to prison. BCI was coming Wednesday to look at one body in a viewing room, by appointment, announced 3 days in advance. 3 days is a long time to move a cooler. So Chase did not break in. He got invited. Ravenel Restoration held the after-hours emergency contract for 11 commercial buildings in Vandalia County, because there were exactly 2 restoration outfits in the county, and the other one didn't answer the phone at night. One of those 11 contracts, signed in 2019 and renewed every January, was with Whitcomb & Sons Funeral Home. Chase's own father had installed their sump system. And Carice Mattingly's text, the one Chase had swiped away on the worst morning of his life, had said that Whitcomb wanted his annual backflow inspection moved up. Chase went back and read the full work order on Tuesday night. Whitcomb had called it in on the 4th of August, 9 days before the pond, because the floor drains in the preparation room had been running slow. And what makes a floor drain in a basement prep room run slow, in a building from 1937 on a sanitary line that ties into a county main at the bottom of a hill, is a partially failed backflow preventer, which meant that Anson Whitcomb's basement was already one hard rain away from filling up with its own sewer, and he knew it, and he had been trying to get it fixed for 11 days. Chase looked at the National Weather Service forecast for Vandalia County. Thursday, 2 to 4 inches, heaviest overnight, flash flood watch in effect. He did not touch that man's plumbing. He wanted to. He sat in the shop with a pipe wrench in his hand for a genuinely long time and thought about how easy it would be, and then he put the wrench down, because Sunday Halstead had said one sentence to him that he could not get out of his head. They will take one dirty thing you did, and they will hang the whole case on it. So he did the only thing he needed to do. He called Carice at 6 in the morning and said, "Push the Whitcomb backflow inspection. Push it to the 26th. You said push it to next month a week ago. I know. Push it again. And Carice, when the storm hits Thursday night, I want you on call, not me. I want you to take the call. I want you to take Presley. And I want you to run that job exactly the way we run every job. Full protocol. Nothing extra. Nothing less." There was a pause on the line long enough for a smart woman to understand something. "Chase," Carice said carefully, "are you asking me to go looking?" "No. I am specifically asking you not to. I'm asking you to photograph every square foot of a water loss and inventory the contents, the way our contract requires, the way our carrier requires, and the way we have done it 1,100 times." He closed his eyes. "If there is nothing in that basement, you'll photograph nothing. That's the point. I don't want a search. I want a record." The rain started Thursday at 8:40 in the evening. At 11:52, 3 inches into it, the sanitary main at the bottom of Cemetery Hill surcharged, and the failed backflow preventer at Whitcomb & Sons did exactly what a failed backflow preventer does. At 12:06 a.m., Anson Whitcomb's after-hours emergency line rolled over to Ravenel Restoration. At 12:31, Carice Mattingly parked a box truck in the alley behind the funeral home and put on boots and picked up a camera. There is a protocol for a Category 3 water loss in a commercial structure, and it is not optional, and every restoration technician in America learns it in the same 40-hour class. You photograph the exterior. 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 In a container you failed to log, you do it in a school, in a diner, in a church, and in a funeral home, identically, because the protocol does not care what the building is for. Carice Mattingly ran the protocol. Anson Whitcomb met her at the alley door in slacks and bare feet at midnight with 4 inches of gray water in his basement, and said he'd rather she just pumped it and came back in the morning, and Carice said the thing she had said to 100 property owners at 100 worst moments. "Sir, if I pump before I document, your carrier denies the whole claim, and you eat $40,000. 20 minutes, then we pump. He was a funeral director. He had been telling people what had to happen at terrible hours his entire life. He knew the exact sound of a professional being immovable. He let her in. Presley took the north half. Carries took the prep room. She photographed the drain, the standing water, the baseboards, the cabinets, the floor sink, the compressor. She photographed the walk-in refrigeration unit because it was a piece of mechanical equipment sitting in 4 inches of contaminated water, and any technician who does not photograph and log an appliance in the wet zone is a technician who is about to cost his company money. She opened it because the contract required her to check for water intrusion in a sealed unit and note the internal temperature. There were 2 occupied cots inside. One was a woman in her 80s, tagged, with a service scheduled for Saturday. The paperwork was on the door in a plastic sleeve. The other was a small one, and the tag on it was handwritten, and it said, Vantrease, R. Hold, 6 9s, and there was no paperwork in the sleeve at all. Karis Mattingly had been an EMT for 6 years. She did not make a sound. She photographed the interior of the unit exactly the way she photographed every mechanical unit. Wide, medium, tight, thermometer in frame, tag legible. And she logged it in the contents inventory as unit contains 2 decedents, tags photographed, and she closed the door and finished the room and mapped the moisture, and then she pumped his basement, because they had a contract, and she was there until 5 a.m. She wrote him a work order and had him sign it, and he signed it, because he had watched her spend 5 hours saving his floor. The photographs uploaded to the Ravenel restoration server automatically at 5:14 in the morning, hashed and time-stamped, the way 406,000 others had. Chase did not go to Sheriff Standifer. He went, at 8 that morning, to 3 places at once, because he had learned in 11 days that a small county protects itself, and the only thing it cannot protect itself from is somebody bigger. Sunday Halstead took the file to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation and to an assistant attorney general in Columbus, who handled elder exploitation, with Elowen Vantrease's signed statement stapled to the front. Bridger Kirkendall took it to the Carriers Council, who took it to the Ohio Department of Insurance Fraud Division, and who also, because Kirkendall was thorough in a way that bordered on artistic, filed a complaint with the Board of Embalmers and Funeral Directors that same morning. And Chase Ravenel drove to a trailer on the north end of town and knocked on Kelso Doggett's door at 8:40 in the morning and handed him a single photograph. Kelso looked at it. Then he looked at Chase. Then he sat down on his own steps. "I didn't know at first," he said. "I believe you." He told me it was a hold. People go on hold. That's a real thing. That happens. His hands were going. Then in August he says, "Get the van," and we're going out to that pond at 4 in the morning. And I said, "Anson," and he said, "Kelso, you've got a felony, and I've got the coroner's book. So which one of us do you think they believe?" "Kelso," Chase said, "there is one version of the rest of your life where you are the man who told them, and there is another version where you are the man they found out about. You've got about 6 hours to pick." Kelso Doggett walked into the BCI field office in Cambridge at 2:15 that afternoon with a lawyer he could not afford and gave 4 hours of statement. And while he was doing it, 40 miles away, Devaney Presnell sat at her mother's kitchen table with a claim packet from a structured settlement carrier in front of her. Because Chase had asked Bridger Kirkendall for one thing, and Kirkendall had gotten the carrier's counsel to bless it in writing, and it was this: don't deny the claim. Don't tell her anything. Send her the standard proof of loss affidavit and let her fill it out. She filled it out. She wrote that Ryland Chase Ravenel, her son, had died on the 14th of August by accidental drowning. She wrote that she had personally identified his remains at the scene. She wrote that she was the sole contingent payee under a designation executed 14 months prior, and she attached a copy of it. She swore to it, under penalty of perjury, on the 26th of August, 12 days after her living son had been photographed by a sheriff's deputy in his father's kitchen, and 8 days after a magistrate had returned that same living child to his father in a courthouse hallway where she had been present. And then, because she was a notary, and because it saved a trip, she stamped it herself, and entered it, in her own sequential journal, entry 11,402, in her own handwriting. Devaney had insisted on a service. That was the piece Chase never fully understood until the trial, when a BCI agent explained it in one sentence. A claim gets paid faster when there's a funeral, because a funeral is the most persuasive document there is. So on the 30th of August, at 11 in the morning, Whitcomb and Sons held a memorial for Ryland Chase Ravenel. There were 70 people in the chapel. There was a poster board of photographs. There was a closed casket at the front with a spray of white flowers on it, and Anson Whitcomb stood at the door in a charcoal suit and shook every hand that came through it, and a woman in black sat in the front row and was held up on both sides. Chase Ravenel walked in at 4 minutes past 11. He came up the center aisle with Sunday Halstead on his left and Elowen Vantries on his right, holding the old woman's arm, and behind them came 2 BCI agents and a woman from the Attorney General's office and Sheriff Ingram Standifer, who had been shown the photographs at 7 that morning and had not said a word for 2 full minutes afterward. The room turned around in its seats the way a room does. Anson Whitcomb came up the aisle fast and quiet. "Chase, not here. Whatever this is." "Mr. Whitcomb," the taller agent said, and held up a folded paper. "We have a warrant for the remains in that casket, and for the refrigeration unit in your basement, and a second one for your removal logs going back 6 years. You can open it, or I can." "There's a family in this room," Anson said. "There's 2, said Elowen Vantries. They opened it in front of everybody, which was not the plan, and which nobody afterward regretted. Elowen Vantries walked to the casket on Chase's arm and looked in for a long moment, and put her ruined hand flat on the boy's chest, and said his name, his whole name, first and middle and last, the way you say it to a child who is in trouble and needs to know you still love him. And in the 7th row, Devaney Presnell stood up and started toward the door. She got as far as the vestibule, where Deputy Corbett Mabry was standing with his hat in his hand, and where the side door of the chapel opened, and a caseworker walked a small boy in a clip-on tie through it, because a magistrate had ordered the child produced for identification purposes, and because the state's lawyer had wanted, on the record, in front of witnesses, one clean answer to the question of whether Ryland Ravenel was alive. The boy saw his mother. He did not run to her, and he did not run from her. He stood in the vestibule of a funeral home at 8 years old with 70 people watching, and he said, "Mom, they said you told them I was dead." Devaney Presnell got 16 years. The forgery came apart in 3 weeks. An examiner from Columbus matched the form's ink to a lot of blue gel pens, and matched the stroke order to Devaney's own known signatures, and testified that it was a skilled simulation traced off the 2019 settlement page. But it was entry 11,402 in her own notary journal that the prosecutor put on the screen and left there for the whole closing argument, a woman certifying, in her own hand, the death of a child she had seen alive 8 days before, aggravated theft by deception, forgery, tampering with records, complicity in gross abuse of a corpse, kidnapping, for the 4 hours between the suitcases and a laundry room window, 2 counts of endangering children, perjury. Anson Whitcomb got 22. Because when BCI pulled 6 years of removal logs, Ridley Vantries was not the only child-sized gap in them. 3 other quiet, kind, off-the-books dispositions turned up. All of them poor, all of them alone, all handled personally, all with a paid-in-full invoice, and a box of somebody else's ashes on somebody's shelf. He had been practicing for years at being the only person in the room who knew what was true. His license was revoked in November. Whitcomb and Sons dissolved in February. Dr. Stedman, who had signed a death certificate for a boy he never looked at, surrendered his coroner's appointment and cried on the stand, and Chase asked Sunday Halstead not to name him in the civil suit. Kelso Doggett pled to obstruction, served 14 months, and testified for 4 days. Verona Presnell, who had known about Anson for 2 years and about the suitcases for 1 night, testified for the state after Chase drove her out to Sable Road and sat her in a chair across from Elowen Vantries and said nothing at all for 20 minutes. The commutation clause was voided as a matter of law. You cannot inherit from a death you manufactured, and you certainly cannot inherit from one that didn't happen. The court appointed an independent corporate trustee, and Ryland's structure went back to being exactly what it had always been, which was a boring schedule of payments that would matter to a man of 25 that Chase intended to be alive to meet. And the building on Cemetery Hill went to auction in April. Chase Ravenel bought it for $119,000, which was most of what he had, and everyone in Vandalia County had a theory about why. He gutted it. He took the prep room down to the joists himself over 11 weekends, with Karras and Presley and 2 guys from the crew and, for the easy parts, an 8-year-old with a pry bar and safety glasses. He pulled the refrigeration unit out with a chain hoist and had it cut up for scrap and watched them do it. Then he donated the building, free and clear, to the county, to be the Vandalia County Child Advocacy Center, the place where a kid who needs to tell somebody something gets to tell it once, on video, to a person trained to listen, instead of 11 times to strangers. The letters over the door are 4 inches high and they say, "The Ridley Vantrease Center." Elowen Vantrease cut the ribbon. She was 72 by then. She has a headstone with the right name and the right dates on it, 40 feet inside the gate at Harrow Springs Cemetery, and a boy is under it, and the county paid for exactly none of it. And on a Tuesday morning in October, Chase Ravenel stood at his counter at 10 till 7 and took the crusts off in 1 piece, and put mustard on the top slice only, and cut an apple into 8, and slid a business card in under the slices where a kid wouldn't see it until he was already eating. Behind him, at the table, in a hood with the drawstrings pulled tight, his son said, "Milk's cold." "Milk's cold," Chase said, and had to put both hands on the counter for a second. "That's the general idea of milk." And this time, the boy laughed. Here's where I keep landing on this one. Chase Ravenel didn't beat these people because he was brave, or because he was clever, or because he loved his kid more than they hated him. He beat them because for 11 years he had been photographing baseboards. 400,000 pictures of wet drywall and serial numbers and rooms nobody would ever look at again, and buried in the middle of that, frame 41 of Job 9941, was a boy in a red t-shirt holding a dog collar. He already had the answer. He'd had it for 6 weeks. He just hadn't been asked the question yet. That's the thing I want you to take with you, and it isn't really about funeral homes. Everybody in this story who got hurt in a place where only one person was keeping the record. One man decided who the dead were. One woman decided what a signature meant. Nobody was checking either of them, because both of them were kind about it, and kindness is the cheapest cover story there is. So be boring. Keep the receipt. Keep the photo with the date on it. Write down the thing you noticed, even when you feel stupid writing it down. You are not being paranoid. You are building the only version of the truth that survives somebody else's story about you. Chase still runs the company. He still uses black pens. And there's a building on Cemetery Hill with a 9-year-old's name over the door, 4 inches high, where a kid only has to say it once,